It's good to see everyone. We got bass over there. I like that. Boy, I didn't sing tenor for a while. It's good to see everyone today. Grateful for your presence. We're studying the parables of Jesus. Probably one of the most popular passages for the parables is Luke, the 15th chapter. We studied the last time we got together, at least last time I was preaching on this, about the issue of lost things found. And really, if we want to deal with the context of all this, we have to go back to the story. It's not a fable. It's dealing with things that would be factual. But it has a spiritual emphasis at the end of it. The context for this is found in Luke, the 15th chapter, beginning the first two verses. Luke writes, "Then all the tax collectors and the sinners drew near to him to hear him. And the Pharisees and the scribes complained, saying, 'This man receives sinners and eats with them.' So he spoke this parable to them, saying," well, who's the them there? Well, you have tax collectors and sinners. They were sort of at the bottom of the totem pole, weren't they, socially at that time? Because the Pharisees, we're holy, and we don't want our holiness to be affected by these type of people. Well, the idea of holiness is holiness of heart. It's not like Mom always was telling us, wash your hands, wash behind your ears. I never saw Mom and Dad washing behind their ears. I sort of feel, man, I got chipped on that thing. Holiness means we honor God in everything that we think, say, and do. And the reason why Jesus taught parables, remember, over a third of what Jesus actually said. For those of you who have red letter Bibles, you know that it puts the spoken word of Jesus in red. Believe it or not, the whole thing is his word. But over a third of that was in parables. So we talked about the issue of lost things found, about that one lost sheep. How important was that sheep to the shepherd? Pretty important, wasn't it? That one lost coin, how important was it to that woman? It was pretty important. And we took a look at the lost son, the prodigal. By the way, do you know what the word prodigal means? Looking at that back in the original language, it means a good for nothing. The good for nothing became good for something because he came back home, didn't he? And what happened? The father welcomed him. I like thinking about that, don't you? About lost sheep that are important, that are about that lost coin, that's so important. And especially that lost son that was so important, because you know something? Each and every one of us were lost but found through Christ. And that's how God cares about us. But this last one, this is a tough one to grasp. I mentioned this before, being a Bible class teacher and teaching some of our younger ones, and you ask them a question, their whole perspective on the world is totally different than ours, right? Bible class teacher asking, who was the saddest? By a little Johnny or Bobby, raising their hand, and the teacher acknowledges that. And the answer comes right out. The fatted calf was. Mm. Yes, but there's somebody I think there's even more tragedy involved in that. And that is that older son. I want to ask you a question. We're in a country that's probably as affluent as anything else. Why is there so much depression out there? Why is there so much depression out there? The basic things of life, the down to earth issues, somehow they got swept aside. In Sweden, they thought they had the ultimate socialist utopia back in the 60s and the 70s. And if you were a senior citizen, you were guaranteed housing. You were guaranteed having a warm place to stay in the winter and a cool place in summer. It gets hot out there too. And 3 squares a day. Everything was taken care of except, well, remember, God said initially in the garden, it's not good for man to live alone. And they had their problems with depressions there. We have a marvelous, marvelous tale here about one who was lost that became saved. But yet, on the opposite side, we have one that was saved and seemingly becomes lost. It's a story of contrast here. You ever go to a jewelry store, by the way? I know I don't frequent them an awful lot, basically because I'm no good at picking out jewelry. But I remember when I got my engagement, no, it's not my engagement ring, it's hers. Let's get that straight or I'm in big trouble. When I got my wife's engagement ring, you know what they did? The jeweler there, Wonderland was the guy's name. That's sort of a strange name, but he was there in his little shop, and he hit a little switch, and they had these lights like up here. You know, so you can see my landing zone there for mosquitoes. He turned that switch on, and the lights were down on the counter there, and he pulled out this beautiful piece of green velvet, dark green velvet. And he put the ring down there on that, and they popped it up. And this guy was a good salesman. He sold me on this ring. But he popped it up, and all of a sudden, all that light was hitting all those facets at just the right angle. So you had this gleaming, gleaming stone against a dark, luxurious background. This is the contrast that Jesus is giving here. He's trying to tell these Pharisees, look, you look down your nose at these people. These people are important to me. God looks at us as souls that he wants to redeem. The Pharisees looked at the tax collectors, at the sinners. It's like, get the riffraff out of here. No, we don't look at people that way. And we need to wonder and understand that even man at his worst doesn't change the fact that God can always be at his best. That's the way we are. How do you live your life? Are you constantly reacting to situations, or do you have a purpose? Do you have a focus? You're the actor. You're the one that is planned instead of being buffeted around by life. Point number one, why not me? Well, let's look at the text there in Luke 15, beginning verse 25. We're talking about the older son here. Now his older son was in the field. Remember, the younger son had come back, had repented to his father. The father, un, unbeknownst to that son, instead of saying, okay, you can be one of my hired hands, he put the robe on, he put the ring on, he put the sandals on. He said, it's time to celebrate. He was dead, now he's alive. So his older son was out in the field. As he came and drew near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of his servants and asked what these things meant. He said to him, your brother is come, and because he's received him safe and sound, your father has killed the fatted calf. Look at this. This guy's come. Says to him, he fills him in on all these details. Don't you think in the back of that guy's mind, he was saying, I wonder if he's celebrating because my younger good-for-nothing brother came back. You know, the servant was smarter than that older son. He knew why the father was rejoicing. Matter of fact, when we look, when the father approaches this older son at the end of this parable, he said, I had to be glad. I had to be glad. I appreciate what Chuck said at the table concerning giving. How hard is it for us to give wouldn't even be a pittance in proportion to what Christ has done for us at the cross? And all this older brother could see was he was getting the banquet that I deserved. So that's what it is. This next section is interesting. Hear this older brother, it's interesting. How was he looking at life? He had a jaundiced eye. Beginning verse 28, but he was angry and would not go in. Therefore his father came out and pleaded with him. So he answered, said to his father, lo, these many years I have been serving you. I never transgressed your commandment at any time. And yet you never gave me a young goat that I might make merry with my friends. But as soon as this son of yours came, who has devoured your livelihood with harlots, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. You think he missed something there? I do. And be glad, for your brother was dead and is alive again, and was lost and is found. It was right. In other words, as far as moral and physical and spiritual obligation, we have to do it. It's the right thing to do. Dad's trying to set them straight here. Let's take a look at the details before we go on. He was angry, but why was he angry? I want us to delve into this a little bit because this has to be made practical. Jesus is trying to let these Pharisees know you need to change your whole outlook on how you look at people. Don't stratify them. Don't classify them. Don't prejudge them. Don't put them in a cubbyhole. People are not like things. They're not meant to be used. They're meant to be loved, cared for. Why was he angry? Number one, he was self-righteous. There's another instance a little bit later on in Luke's gospel about self-righteousness. Remember the Pharisee and the publican? It's a parable without a punchline because the punchline actually comes from what the participants say. Really, Jesus asks a question in the end. Who went home justified? Luke 18, verse 10. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself. God, I thank you that I'm not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even this tax collector. Self-righteousness. Paul warning the Jews of their problem about their self-righteousness. They were the chosen of God, yes, but now everybody through the gospel is chosen. In Romans 2, verse 1, therefore you are inexcusable, O man, whoever you are who judge. For whatever you judge another, you condemn yourself, for you who judge practice the same things. You know, the old adage, practice what you preach. Chuck, we probably get hit with that more than anything else, right? Practice what you preach. In other words, be consistent. Okay, great. I'll go with that. But this is what Paul's trying to tell the Jews. Look, you're looking down on your Gentile brethren there. You can't do that. You can't do that. You need saved through the blood of Jesus Christ. You need the righteousness of Christ just as much as the Gentiles do. Later in 2 Corinthians 10, verses 10 and 12, listen to what Paul says to the brethren there, because he's dealing with complaints. This is the complaint department here. A lot of people did not like what Paul was saying, so guess what? Paul has to defend himself. There in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 10, Paul says, for his letters, they say, are weighty and powerful, but his bodily presence is weak, his spirit, his speech contemptible. Let such a person consider this, that what we are in word by letters when we were absent, such we will be also indeed when we are present. The old adage is, what you see is what you get. For we dare not class ourselves or compare ourselves with those who commend themselves, but they, measuring themselves by themselves and comparing themselves among themselves, are not wise. That's the problem with self-righteousness. Oh, what a good person I am. Really? These people love to go the wrong way, don't they? How do we compare ourselves with others? Number two, what does he mention? All these years, all of a sudden longevity becomes the prime factor above all. I went to a congregation in New Jersey, and it was sort of interesting, culturally a little bit different than the average congregation. And it was for a funeral, and they had a couple ladies there, and they were helping to be ushers. I was head scratching that one for a while. I asked one of these ladies, she had this big pin on. I said, what's that pin for? And she says, that's my 20-year pin. 20 years, huh? I don't know where they get this stuff from. Let's get back to the Bible. I keep it simple, okay? I don't need a 20-year, a 30-year, or 40-year pin, because It's not what I've done, it's what I'm doing that counts in the kingdom. That's the key. Self-righteous people love to compare. Oh, they get so wrapped up on all this stuff. All these years, longevity is more important. Then here's this thing. He says, this son of yours. This is disdain. In Matthew 20, verse 12, these last men that day, another parable we're going to deal with. What happened there? There's some fellows there, they've been out working for 12 hours. And they wind up, hold it, you paid them the same amount. The them, by the way, were those that came in at the 11th hour. That's not fair. I got news for you, and here's the most important thing you might take out of this time we spend together this morning. God is not fair. God is gracious. There could be somebody baptized into Christ one day and die the week later, and guess what? He's going to be just as welcome in heaven as somebody that has been faithful all their life. Now remember, on Wednesday night we say your works follow after you. Some people are going to have a lot of stuff following down the pipe, which is a beautiful thing. But this idea of fairness, that's been taken so far in our society that because of fairness, we don't know. People can't even define what a man or a woman is anymore. This is getting crazy. All because of fairness. Don't put that on God. Don't get God in on this argument. God is not fair. God is perfect in his righteousness and in his justice. And God is gracious. Of course, I already mentioned Luke 11. The Pharisee was praying to God, I'm not like other people or this tax collector. There in Acts 17:18. The Epicurean and the Stoic philosophers were encountering Paul. By the way, the Epicureans and the Stoics were at the opposite end of the stick. How in the world could they come together and start criticizing somebody? It had to be pretty bad, or else they were pretty threatened. And some said, what does this babbler want to say? This babbler, okay? They're disdaining him. Oh, these people are self-righteous. They'll disdain people. Not only was he self-righteous, he is jealous. He wasn't content with what he had, verse 31. The issue wasn't who got the most parties, by the way, here. The issue was lost or saved. Oh, I pray to God, if our brethren would get this straight, we need to understand if we're going to be just Christians, let's get back to God's word, do what the book says, and understand that we're here to reach the lost and to keep the saved. What is written becomes eminently important, doesn't it, when that's the case? Oh, so we have all this in the son. What happened? He was heartless. He was heartless. He refused to be happy. Why? He forgot how to give. Here's an interesting phrase that Jesus gave there at Simon the Pharisee's house there. Remember when he's anointed by that lady, and he says, therefore I say to you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But listen to this phrase. But he to whom little is forgiven, the same loves little. He's not talking about that from a spiritual perspective, but from our perspective. If you think you're such a good person and being baptized, just is sort of like putting a patina on our spirituality, you did it for the wrong reason. Christ didn't die to make me look good. Christ died to save my soul. And this is the key. He forgot how to give. Well, let's apply this quickly, okay? Why not us is the question. How do you fit into that picture? By the way, this is one of the big problems that we have in biblical interpretation. We need to take a look at it personally. I had a fellow in preacher training school. This guy was really interesting because a little quirky. But what he did was anytime there was a general statement about who God loved or who God wanted to promise something to, he sort of put a very light pencil line through that and wrote over there his name. John 3:16, his Bible. For God so loved Don that he gave his only begotten son. I asked him, why do you do that? He said, well, I'm not trying to edit the Bible. He said, I just want to understand something. I need to take this personally. This is the whole thing. Put yourself in the picture. Number one, how often are we practicing self-righteousness instead of Christ's righteousness? Ooh. Number two, how often does our jealousy flare over something? Somebody got something that I think I should have gotten. Number three, how much of our lives are really pumped clean of forgiveness that we and so others desperately need by grudges and hatred? When we're back in Virginia, one of the preachers there in Virginia in the Lord's Church was a McCoy. I kept ripping him and said, Oscar, you ever meet a Hatfield? He said, no, but if I did, I'd be in big trouble. You know about that, the Hatfields and the McCoys? We laugh about that. Wow, that wasn't any laughing matter back at the front end of the 20th century. And here's a punchline. If we react to life instead of acting in love, we're going to be like that older son. What's the conclusion? You can change. Well, let me give you a short guide, a five-stepper here to how to deal with curing complaining and jealousy. Number one, walk properly. In Romans 13:13, Paul says, let us walk properly as in the day. The word properly there in the original actually talks about decorum. Think about this. When I grew up, Mom was all concerned about which fork got used first and which spoon. And Dad wasn't so concerned about that, so we went down to one fork and one spoon. But where they had to go, you had to place them just right. You have to do this, you don't eat with your fingers. I've forgotten a lot of this stuff, it. But it's decorum. Why? You want to do what's right. Nowadays, I get the idea a lot of people get really upset about people trying to do what's right. But isn't that so? J.C. Penney made a fortune, literally, back well over 100 years ago, by one simple statement: treat people right. For Christians, it's like, you not only treat people right, it's because you want to honor God and treat him right. You walk properly. Let us walk properly as in the day, not in revelry and drunkenness, not in lewdness, not in lust, not in strife and envy. You don't do that as a Christian. In 1 Peter 4, verse 9, be hospitable to one another. And here's the key, without grumbling. You don't do that. 1 Peter 1:15, but he who called you is what? Holy. You also be holy in what? In all your conduct, in everything you do. Hold it for a second. Well, I know about worship. We need to be holy there, Bill. But what about when we click on the TV? What about when we get on the internet? What about when we're out in the world? What about when that off-color joke is flying through the air? That's where the rubber meets the road on that thing. Walk properly. Number 2, stop complaining. Paul mentions in Philippians 2:14-16, do all things without complaining and disputing, that you may become blameless and harmless. And he describes that. Children of God without fault in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast the word of life. So I may rejoice in the day of Christ, that I have not run in vain or labored in vain. He's saying, don't throw it all away. Stop complaining. James 5:9, same thing. Do not grumble against one another, brethren, lest you be condemned. Listen to this last phrase. Behold what? The judge is at the door. Where's the judge? He's right at the door. You think God doesn't know what you're thinking, what you're doing, what's happening? Stop complaining. Walk properly, stop complaining. Number 3, grow up. In 1 Corinthians 3, verse 3, Paul says, for you are still carnal, for where there is envy, strife, and divisions among you, are you not carnal and behaving like mere men? He's saying, grow up. 2 Corinthians 12:20. Obviously, I didn't learn a lesson 100% after the first letter. In verse 20, for I fear lest when I come I shall not find you such as I wish, that I shall be found by you such as you do not wish, lest there be contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, backbitings, whisperings, conceits, tumults. What's it saying there? You got to grow up. Number 4, don't boast or lie. Live in the truth. I hear a lot of people in Washington, D.C. Guess what? You want to find out? The minute you start boasting is usually the minute you start lying. Isn't that true? Because if you're boasting, if you're trying to inflate, well, I created the internet. Mr. Gore did not create the internet. He was boasting about creating the internet. That's not true. James, the 3rd chapter, beginning verse 14, but if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast and lie about the truth. He ends that phrase there in verse 16. Seek peace in wisdom. What does wisdom tell us? Think before you start working your lips. In James, the 3rd chapter, verse 17, it says, but wisdom that's from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, willing to yield, full of mercy, good fruits, without partiality, without hypocrisy. Now the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. And that all the way down in the 4th chapter, verse 6, it says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Don't do that. Seek peace and wisdom. There's the big 5. And here's the key. Luke 15 ends with that story about the, the non-prodigal son that became a prodigal. The story ends there. Your story hasn't ended yet. The question right now is, what are you going to do about your story before you become his story or his story? Think about that. What motivates your life? Where's your focus? I'll tell you one thing. I don't want to be a older son, although I am physically an older son. I don't want to be that type of person. Can you imagine somebody that has been blessed and has the love of their father, and yet is just plain miserable, even though he has all this stuff? His whole issue is not on what he has, but what he doesn't have. I don't know about you. You can make yourself pretty miserable about thinking that way. Now, what do you have? If you have Christ, grow in him. If not, why not? Why not come believing? Why not come repenting? Yeah, change is needed. Why not come confessing? That's right, Christ is Lord of all. Why not come and be baptized, immersed in water? Have you done that so your sins can be forgiven? Do you understand why Jesus died on the cross? He did that so you could be cleansed from sin. And that's where we enter into the covenant agreement with God. When we're immersed by faith in repentance through confessing Christ as Lord. And are you living faithful? I'll tell you one thing. That older son thought he was faithful, and that younger son was unfaithful. He was dead wrong. I want to be right with God. What about you? Think about that as we stand and sing.